chapter of ISIS's presence. They have left absolute devastation in their wake.
Extraordinary to stand exactly where ISIS may, in fact, have been plotting attacks against the West.
This is the strange new world in Syria and the end game of the fight against ISIS. NATO ally facing NATO ally. We're headed now deep inside gang territory.
This crisis all created by the mad policies of a government.
This city almost constantly living with the threat of a Russian invasion.
This is CNN Breaking News.
You're watching CNN. I'm Julia Chatterley in New York, and we begin with the latest on the crisis in Ukraine. And with each passing day, the suffering continues as the Russians maintain their bombardment. CNN teams on the ground in Kiev reporting the sound of explosions, and in Lviv, the sound of air raid sirens.
Hear that?
We understand that siren was the all-clear signal. Elsewhere in Lviv, a fuel depot ablaze on Saturday after being targeted by a Russian cruise missile. And this video showing the city of Kharkiv in ruins. An advisor to President Zelensky accusing Vladimir Putin of trying to wipe Ukraine, quote, off the face of the earth. Ahead of talks this week in Istanbul, President Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to accept neutral, non-nuclear status under certain conditions.
Our priorities in the negotiations are known. Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are beyond doubt. Effective security guarantees for our state are mandatory. Our goal is obvious: peace and the restoration of normal life in our native state as soon as possible.
Now, Ukraine's military intelligence chief says that he believes Vladimir Putin is seeking to split Ukraine into two, using the post-war division between North and South Korea as his model. Nick Robertson joins us now. Nick, good to have you with us. I think for most people looking at the map, they'll long have understood this idea of perhaps of a corridor along the south of the country into the east, so connecting Crimea with the Donbass region. If you combine that potential view with what we've heard from President Zelensky over the last day or two, where do you think that leaves potential negotiations in Turkey this week?
I think both sides are still a long way apart. What we're hearing from President Zelensky represents in many ways the pressure that he's under from NATO, from the United States, from the European Union, to be able to continue to get the weapons supplies that he needs to fight Russia. And these nations are all committed to helping support him in one way or another, particularly with defensive weapons rather than the big weapons he wants. So he's sort of stuck. He certainly doesn't have the might to flush the Russian army out of Ukraine. So he does need to look to the diplomatic path, and that's partly why the support that he's getting is constructed in that way. The nations that support Ukraine don't want to see an escalation of the fighting. So what we're hearing him say is that he is willing for Ukraine to become neutral as long as it has security guarantees, and there he's looking to the West for those security guarantees. But here's the big hurdle, and this is why I say we're not near, because the big hurdle in all of this is that he would want this to come about, this new position for Ukraine, to come about through popular support, through a referendum. But the conditions, he says, for that referendum are that Russia must withdraw its forces back to pre-war phase, back to pre the 24th of February, which means there are no Russian forces inside Ukraine. And when you add that into that land corridor that we hear the Minister of Intelligence there in Ukraine speaking about, not just the land grab by Russia, but Russia implementing in the south sort of parallel leadership's administration and insisting, according to the minister in Ukraine, that citizens inside Ukraine are now forced to use the Russian currency, not Ukrainian currency. That's how the leadership in Kyiv sees Russia at the moment, as trying to separate North and South like Korea. And they're saying, no, we're ready to move forward, but you've got to get your troops out and relinquish that kind of control. This is why I think we're a distance apart, or the two sides are a distance apart at the moment, Julia.
Yeah, none of it seems comparable and compatible with Russian intentions, at least at this stage. I think also what we have to discuss as well, and Nick, to get your sense and opinion on this, is the fact that President Zelensky was talking to Russian journalists, those that have been forced to close down or to leave, to stop doing what they were trying to achieve in Russia. How important is that in light particularly of what President Biden said over the weekend? And then obviously the White House and Biden clarified it too. This man cannot remain in power. They're saying, look, they're not pushing for regime change, but there is a sense that there's messaging attempts being made to the Russian people themselves.
They're hugely important, and the people that are most important to are the Ukrainian leadership, because the way to try to slow down the Russian offensive is to build support in Russia against it. And that's near impossible because Russia is shutting down not just all or almost all of its independent media, and another independent media channel was given its sort of shutdown orders today in Russia as well. Russia is also shutting down some international media broadcasts and production inside of Russia. So for Zelensky to speak to Russian independent media, many of whom are now located outside of Russia, it's a way to try to reach around the Kremlin's propaganda and get to that maybe 1/4 of the population who want that information, who don't want the government propaganda, and who want to hear from the Ukrainian leadership about their real position and not what the Kremlin's telling them. So that's important. And when it comes to what President Biden has said about President Putin, and that's sort of been walked back by various U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the most recent. President Biden walked it back as well. This sort of plays into what we've heard from the French President Emmanuel Macron, saying, look, I wouldn't use that sort of language because I'm still trying to talk to President Putin. And Macron at the moment has probably had more phone calls than any other European leader to President Putin and President Zelensky, and is currently working on an effort to try to get civilians, and an estimated as many as 150,000, out of the besieged city of Mariupol in the south of Ukraine. So President Macron is sort of trying not to find a grand fix for the whole war, but at the moment trying to find medium-term and immediate solutions for the humanitarian suffering that's underway. And for that reason, he says he wouldn't use the language that President Biden used, because that just escalates tensions and potentially escalates the war as well.
Nick Robertson, great to have you with us. Thank you. Now, the southeastern city of Zaporizhzhia is now under an emergency curfew as officials closely monitor the Russian troops' movements. As Ivan Watson reports.
This is a checkpoint at the entrance to the eastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia. But this is an unusual day. The government has imposed a citywide daytime curfew. Traffic is not being allowed in or out. And we're getting a look with the local police force at how they're enforcing this emergency curfew. I'm getting a tour of the city with two local police inspectors. We have passed many deployed Ukrainian soldiers. We cannot show them or film them for their safety, given that there is a full-fledged war taking place in this country. What is striking about this daytime curfew is that a city of nearly 1 million inhabitants is now a complete ghost town.
My name is Roman, Panchenko Roman. I'm Ukrainian. I serve in police for already 6 years. I like my work. I'm proud of my work. In the territory of the city, only policemen and some military men. Every car which goes to the city is checked.
The police say it's easier to maintain security and search for suspected Russian collaborators when the city is locked down.
How far away is the Russian army right now from where we are?
Russian army is several fronts, but the nearest place where Russian tanks are dislocated is maybe 30 kilometers from this place.
A half hour by car?
Yes, you're right.
Would you defend Zaporizhia if the Russian army comes here? I mean, you're not soldiers, you're police. Would you fight?
I'm a man. I'm a man. I am a Ukrainian man. As for me, it's very ashamed for a man not to protect his family, not to protect his house, not to protect his life.
The people here know what happened to other Ukrainian cities and towns that have been attacked by the Russian military. They don't want that to happen here, but they say if it does, they're ready.
A humanitarian catastrophe. That's how Ukraine's president is describing the situation in Mariupol following the recent onslaught of the city. These are new images of the utter devastation there. Many who took shelter in basements during the Russian bombardment are returning to find their homes destroyed.
I've lived here since my birth, my husband as well. We got married here and had babies. What now? What is left for us? I don't want to go anywhere from Mariupol, but there's nowhere to live here.
It comes on top of reports of Russian strikes hitting the west of Ukraine, previously considered a relative safe haven. Phil Black is in Lviv on the west of the country for us. Phil, good to have you with us. Just give us a sense of what the latest is there.
So, Julia, there were more cruise missile strikes across the country last night, reported from different locations. Crucially, at least one of them was knocking out yet another fuel storage area. This is in the Volyn region, only a relatively short distance northeast of where I am in Lviv. Those cruise missiles, we are told, were fired from across the border from Belarus. It's a pattern now that we've been seeing for some days here, experienced here in Lviv on Saturday when cruise missiles fired from the Black Sea, naval vessels there, knocked out a fuel storage site here in the center of Lviv. This has also happened in other parts of the country over recent days, near Mykolaiv, near Kiev. It is a clear pattern, a clear tactic by Russia to knock out these logistical and support sites. They've also been attacking weapon storage areas. The hope Russia has here is that by impacting fuel supplies, weapon supplies, you will impact the ability of Ukraine to maintain its defense. Meanwhile, some video has emerged from what appears to be the far east of the country, near the Kharkiv region, which seems to show Ukrainian soldiers mistreating, abusing, even shooting in a non-lethal way captured Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers are seen being shot in the leg. Others are seen on the floor or on the ground with serious leg injuries, implying that they've also experienced the same punishment. They're also abused, and both physically and verbally in other ways. The Ukrainian government has acknowledged this video exists. An advisor to the government says this is serious. We will investigate it. This is not how our soldiers are supposed to behave if it is proven to be true. While the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense says that these sorts of videos, these sorts of moments are being staged by Russia as part of its propaganda war. Julia.
And we'll continue to follow that story in particular too. Phil Black, thank you so much for that report there. Let me bring you up to speed now with some of the other stories making headlines around the world. Shanghai has launched a two-phase lockdown to try to contain a growing COVID outbreak. Starting today, 11 million residents in the east must remain at home and get tested. On Friday, the lockdown will be extended to the west to cover an additional 14 million people. As Stephen Zhang reports.
This lockdown order came after days of confusion and chaos on the streets, but also online about what the authorities would do to Shanghai, which is experiencing its biggest surge of COVID cases since the pandemic began. Now, for days, officials had denied there would be a citywide lockdown, with police even launching investigations against so-called rumor mongers about the city's imminent closure. When you look at the number, more than 16,000 cases since March, a huge deal for China, and with even a suspicion about this number being underreported. But when you dive a bit deeper, the overwhelming majority of these cases have been asymptomatic, which according to most experts would not require much hospital care. So for a long time, up to this latest wave of cases, Shanghai had prided itself on its less disruptive approach to COVID containment. The city had never undergone citywide mass mass testings and its quarantine measures were often considered less restrictive compared to the rest of the country. So there was actually a lot of hope this Shanghai model would be adopted by the rest of the country, more lenient, more targeted approach, and eventually leading to the country to be reopened to the rest of the world. But instead, we are seeing now Shanghai authorities adopting some of the very harsh measures we had previously only seen in other cities, really confining millions of residents to their homes, shutting down a large portion of the city's public transportation, including the world's biggest metro system, and of course, a lot of concerns and even agony about the increasingly strained healthcare system, with a lot of people seeking medical attention for non-COVID related causes being turned away, leading to at least one death of a local nurse because of this. And then, of course, there were a lot of concerns about the city's elderly population, because Shanghai does have the oldest population among all major Chinese cities, and that's the segment of the population that has been under-vaccinated. All of this really leading to a lot of panic buying at stores, at takeout restaurants, and also a growing sense of fatigue, frustration, or even anger really bursting online. But even though all of this is taking place in Shanghai, the decision, of course, is being made here in Beijing. And at least for now, the leadership is showing no sign of trying to change course to their zero COVID policy, because it's been working for them politically. Not to mention their top priority right now is this Communist Party National Congress to be held later this year. It seems, at least for now, they're not going to tolerate this scenario of COVID cases raging across China, as President Xi Jinping is expected to take his third term in office later this year. Stephen Jiang, CNN, Beijing.
Okay, coming up, the cost of war. The Ukrainian finance minister will join us to discuss the government's response and the scale of damage to the country's economy. Plus, the path to energy independence, how Europe's planning to reduce its reliance on Russian oil and gas. All coming up. Stay with us.
For too long, we have waited for hours to convert currencies, days to clear checks, and decades to reach our potential. But now, we can access the power of African free trade in an instant with PAPS, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Overcome barriers, reduce risks, trade in local currencies, and connect with a single market united across Africa. Be a part of Africa's flourishing free trade today.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down for cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
On top of the human suffering caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the economic cost is mounting too. An estimated 30% of the country's economy is incapacitated currently, while at the same time Ukraine operates or continues to operate on a war footing, paying salaries and fulfilling its payment obligations. Money is coming in. Auctions of so-called war bonds have taken place, while the United States is donating $1 billion in humanitarian aid. The International Monetary Fund has approved $1.4 billion in emergency financing, and the EU is sending $500 million worth of military aid too. Still, it's a drop in the ocean compared to an estimated hundreds of billions of dollars in losses that the country may end up facing. Sergei Marchenko is the Ukrainian finance minister, and he joins us now. Finance Minister, good to have you on the show. Thank you for your time. Let's just begin by explaining a third of the country, an estimated 30% of the country incapacitated. Just give us a sense of what that means.
Thank you very much for the ability to talk with you, with your auditorium. I want to tell you that despite all the war which we see right now, our government is still functioning. We ensure all fulfillment of our needs and state needs. We paid salaries, pensions, and other protected expenditures. You mentioned how much we have lost as a country. We see that our preliminary estimation is about 30% based on data from taxation, but it could be more damage because war is still continuing in our country, and more broader or a more correct estimation of our losses we can tell only after some period of time.
Yeah, I understand it's impossible, nearly impossible to gauge what you're seeing at this moment, I'm sure. Do you have any sense of how many people in the country are currently reliant on humanitarian aid at the same time?
Yes, we have data which we use government support tool. We paid $200 US for every person who can't live in that territory, who lost his job. Our preliminary estimation is also a little bit around 3 million people who lost their job, and it could be people who have a position, occupied position in a business or have own business. And it's more than 3 million people now is refugee and lived in a European country temporary, and it's also great damage for our economy.
I mean, in the short term, as you've said, you're still meeting your commitments. You're trying to pay pensions. You have soldiers to pay. You're issuing what's called war bonds, but it's very expensive and it's short-term debt. And that means it needs to be paid back quickly. How long can you continue to do this, to operate like this?
You know, for us, the better scenario is to end the war as quickly as possible, because it's damaging our economy. It's war killing our people, civilians, etc. So for us, the most possible and good scenario is to end this war as fast as possible. However, we want to be able to save our country, to protect our people. That's why we calculated our current budget forecast for around 2 or 3 months period of time, and we have losses in our revenues. That's why the only way to fulfill this fiscal gap is to borrow. So our instrument, war bond, is one of the instruments. Another instrument is international financial organization and concessional financial from different countries. So you mentioned this in your comments. So we received several $3 billion US dollars already and negotiated around $6 billion US dollars. So and of course it's not enough. It's not enough. So now we are trying to create special vehicle for Ukraine together with IMF, together with Ministry of Finance of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, and to allocate part of SDR which was relocated for different countries in 2021 for Ukraine especially. So countries like Canada, United Kingdom, Germany is looking closely at this instrument.
Yeah, and at the same time as you're trying to pay wages and salaries and keep the economy together, I know you've said you're committed to making debt and interest payments in order to keep market access. Your economy ministry has estimated that the cost in its entirety to the economy could be more than $500 billion, $565 billion to be specific. Minister, is that correct? Could it be that big?
It's a way we are talking about what we're estimating. We're estimating the loss of possible GDP because we expected this year GDP growth more than 3%. So it's a loss of GDP growth. So and also it's about a loss of infrastructure. So we should recover our infrastructure to I think that the true figures would be clear only after the war, but preliminary estimation of our Ministry of Economy is true because it's also based on different methodologies how to calculate these losses. So they use different ways on how to calculate it, so it could be very true figures.
Wow. I mean, just so my audience understands, your GDP in 2020, according to the World Bank, was $155 billion, just to put it into perspective of the loss we're talking about. Ukraine's top intelligence chief suggested that Russia's ambitions are to split the country, sort of the north and the south, that Russia will try and create a corridor between Crimea and the Donbass region. Minister, if we keep the politics out of it, and I know that's difficult, what would that mean to the economy? Can Ukraine accept that loss of the country? Surely it would mean too great a level of devastation for the economy, never mind other losses.
You know, we will not accept any losses, any meters of our countries, so we will fight against any possible scenario which moves us towards this. So our idea is to safeguard and protect all our countries in the borders before the 24th of February. So, and it's not possible even to mention that we can live without some part of our territory because of it's about our economy, it's about our people, it's about our logistics. Now our harbor in Odessa region is blocked, so we need to find another way how to transfer commodities towards Europe and other countries, and that's why for us it's important to fight against aggressor till the end, till the last meter of our territory will be safe and independent.
Minister, President Biden said in Poland over the weekend that man, and he meant Vladimir Putin, cannot remain in power. And the White House has said, and President Biden himself has said, they were not pushing for regime change in Russia. Where does the Ukrainian government stand? Do you believe that Putin should no longer be in power in Russia?
I don't want to talk about this bloody Putin's regime because for us it's important that every Russian citizen suffer, and that's why sanction is very important in this particular matter. And our government and our president try to do everything is possible that every Russian citizen to understand that the way they support their power is the wrong way, so they should think about this, because it's not their country which is in the blood and which is in shelter, and it's our country which lost their people, civilians, children. That's why, and every additional sanction towards Russia will help us to move this power around. And peace conditions within other people in Russia.
Minister, do you think enough has been done in terms of sanctions to force the Russian government to the negotiating table? There are talks once again this week. How hopeful are you? And what more would you like to see in terms of sanctions if the answer to that question is no?
Of course, it's not enough because a lot of businesses are operating in Russia, still operating in Russia. They pay taxes, they support the Russian army using this mean, if you understand what I mean. And that's why for us it's important that all possible foreign investors move on from Russia and to make the decision either to support bloody aggressor or to support democratic civilian world. That's why we also have our role in this particular scenario. We are closely cooperating with huge international banks, and we see that right now a lot of international banks moving from Russia, and they don't want to operate in Russia territory. And also, for example, huge, the largest tobacco companies like Philip Morris, British American Tobacco, Japan Tobacco International also are looking closely to close their operation in Russia and not pay taxes in Russia.
You've thrown some business names out there, and we will continue to mention that they continue to operate in Russia, sir. Stay safe, and thank you once again for your time today. We're thinking of you. Sergei Marchenko there, Ukrainian Finance Minister, sir, thank you. Okay, still to come. The European Union is the biggest consumer of natural gas from Russia. Now it plans to slash Russian imports. We speak to the EU's chief climate policy guru about its plans next. Stay with us.
The Tony Elumelu Foundation's $100 million entrepreneurship program is empowering Africa's next business leaders. 10,000 entrepreneurs, 54 countries. Become a Tony Elumelu entrepreneur. Apply now.
Have you been bitten by the bug of curiosity? This is CNN 10. My name is Carl Azus. I'll be your explainer-in-chief. Global news. International relations are the key factors. Relevant stories. Everyday people whose action is changing their community. Complex issues explained. We're going back to the future. And 10-second trivia. You get a perfect 10 out of 10. All in 10 minutes. Stream at cnn.com/CNN10.
I'm Bill Weir in Greenland, and this is CNN.
Welcome back. Globalization under pressure once again. The pandemic and trade war have led to a 5.3% shrinkage in trade in 2020. That, according to the World Trade Organization. Add now Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Zain Asher spoke to an economist with the World Bank from the DP World Pavilion at Dubai Expo 2020, who explained why farms are key to boosting trade.
So the past few years, we've seen a setback in trade, in global trade, everything from the COVID-19 pandemic, supply chain issues, the US-China trade war as well, more recently higher oil prices. What can governments around the world do to ensure that their economies become much more resilient to external shocks?
One sort of easy getaway is probably to increase the resilience and adaptability of farms in this global trading landscape.
And it's important to have a multi-pronged approach with all of this because, of course, yes, the goal is to increase global trade and investment, but at the same time, you also have to think about sustainability and inclusivity as well. How do you do both?
I think there are two ways to look at it. There's a role for the policymakers, there's a role for international organizations, and then there's a role for the private sector in itself. Now, when you look at the role for the international organizations in trying to negotiate sort of these trade and sustainability rules, they need to amp up and increase the amount of ambition that they currently have. In today's trading landscape, right, when you think about all of the different initiatives, both from the private sector and the public sector, when you think about carbon mitigation targets by different multinational corporations or different schemes such as the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, you see that all consumers are pushing the governments to act upon the sustainability agenda by putting in place some of these policies. And how are farms going to trade? They really need to show that they have low carbon intensities in their production processes. But once you have that good carbon traceability infrastructure, farms are able to trade much better in a more sustainable way and be able to showcase that they indeed actually have a carbon competitive advantage. And there's also the role of of developing countries, right? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we always think that the developing countries probably do not have such a huge role to play. But what we're increasingly seeing, if you look at the growth rates of carbon emissions over the past 10 years or so, you'll see that actually the smaller countries are carbonizing at a much faster rate than the developed world. Adaptation is critical for smaller countries, but so is mitigation and decarbonization, because that sort of gives you that good base for a green growth that creates a good jobs for the future and creates competitiveness that is useful for trading in today's trading landscape.
Stay with CNN. We'll be back after this.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal al-Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
My name is Emmanuel Ahimieho. I'm the project manager of Bandana Kaba Road. We don't need to import anything that we need on the road. They are all locally available materials. So people from the community, they end up becoming suppliers. I think it has brought life back to the communities. And to be able to lead those people to achieve something worthwhile, something that is of value, I feel extremely proud.
We decided a few years ago to set out on a journey which we call Enable a Fossil-Free Living Within One Generation. And you can see all around Europe that the competitive situation is shifting away from fossil fuels and into renewables and into more nuclear power. So you can see that there's a lot of innovation going on around the fossil-free technologies, and you can also clearly see that the customer demand is shifting. And today I think we can see that companies and customers are actually moving much faster than nations or global initiatives. So I think that this is a business strategy for us. It's not a sustainability strategy first and foremost. It's a business strategy and it is sustainable, but we can clearly see that through this transformation, we are actually getting increasingly competitive.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction. You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
Powerful missile strike in the western city of Lviv over the weekend. The city has not seen the worst of the war, which only made it more stunning to see people packing the streets not long after, as John Berman reports.
Defiance comes in many sizes, in many shapes, in many sounds. And sometimes it's not about being anything other than just being.
You're not going to stay inside.
Yes, because our child wants to breathe fresh air. We want to breathe fresh air. And we don't want to spend such a beautiful day inside.
Even though not 24 hours before, the city was a target of a Russian missile attack. You can see the smoke still rising.
But again, look at those flames. They're just roaring.
You're out walking on the streets enjoying the day. Why?
Because I think any person get used to such sounds, trying to get rid of fear and to live its usual life. I think so. So I'm here because I believe in my army.
Roman, a street musician, is donating half his proceeds to Ukrainian soldiers.
They should see that they cannot defeat our people. We are not scared. I have a friend in Mariupol and he captured a Russian soldier. And they asked this officer, why are you doing such things with our cities? And he answered, because you need to be afraid of the Russian army.
Why are you wearing wings?
Because this is a symbol of unity for Ukraine, freedom and independence.
Independence, Ukraine! Out here on the streets, we're really not far from where these missiles hit. It's about 1.5 miles from here, just past that TV tower you see there in the distance.
For many, even the majority we spoke with, one reason they're relatively unfazed is because they've seen worse. Olena came here from the devastated Kharkiv.
I never thought that I can get used to such things, and when I saw it was far away, the smoke is far away, I wasn't scared. Feeling is familiar for us because we are coming from Kyiv and we know how explosions sound.
Ludmila and Arina are here from the hard-hit Sumy region. They have survived so much.
Even though there could be explosions, we will go outside because we want to show that we are strong, we are not scared. We will fight for our land and we will not give any centimeters of land territory to invaders.
Can you show me your flag?
It's her birthday today.
It's your birthday today?
Her 6th birthday, one she will never forget. Thankfully, not for the bombs, but for the Barbie. And one more thing.
Thank you.
She got a puppet, she told me. A puppet that is all hers. Like this day, for the Ukrainians, that no one can take away.
We're back after this. Stay with us.
Before the Second World War, much of the German watchmaking industry was centered in Saxony. One of the most important brands there was A. Lange & Söhne, known for the supreme excellence of its watches. After the war, Saxony became part of communist East Germany. Lange as a company disappeared when the communists bundled together all of the watch companies in the town. But Walter Lange, the great-grandson of the founders, escaped to the West. In 1990, after the Iron Curtain collapsed, Walter Lange returned to the town and revived the company. A huge task, but he succeeded. But what always hits me about this watch is the dial. The dial of a watch is not a big space, so when you try to arrange the elements on it asymmetrically, you are playing with design fire. But Lange succeeds brilliantly.
Earlier this month, the European Union announced an ambitious goal, ending its reliance on Russian energy imports. The EU is the biggest consumer of natural gas from Russia. Just for context, the bloc depends on Russia for around 40% of its natural gas, nearly 30% of its oil imports, and almost half of its coal imports. The EU plans to slash imports of Russian gas by 2/3 before the end of the year this year and eliminate its dependency on all Russian energy imports by 2027. Here to discuss, Frans Timmermans. He's the Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal. So always great to have you on the show. I know you believe overall that the European Union can do this more quickly, but even if we just talk about the plans for this year, it's hugely ambitious and there are plenty of skeptics.
I can understand that because it's extremely complicated to do what we need to do. But I think we can do it. I think we can pull it off. We can reduce our gas imports from Russia by 2/3. The first indication that we're well on the way is the agreement between President von der Leyen and President Biden for 15 BCM LNG from the United States. So if we then also are more quicker in introducing renewables, and if we can also do a lot more on biogas, then I think we can achieve our goals. And we need to, because we don't want to be sending money to Putin so that he can finance his war.
There's two angles there. There's the investment that you often discuss in renewables, which will foster greater independence more swiftly if it can be done. There's also, to your point, the reliance on others to provide things like LNG. And the United States, as you mentioned, is stepping up. Where else is it going to come from, particularly if, under your proposals, the hope is to have underground gas storage up to 90% capacity by the 1st of October this year? Who else can help? Where's it going to come from?
Well, I think we have multiple sources, potentially. Azerbaijan is one of them. Qatar is the other one. We'll be talking to Saudi Arabia as well. We'll be talking to Morocco, to Egypt, to Algeria. We're going to try and diversify as quickly as we can. Some of it will come through pipelines. Other will be LNG. And we need to also increase our capacity to receive LNG and defrost LNG at our borders. And Germany, among other countries, is working on this. So, yeah, we've got a lot of things we need to do, but I think the most important thing is that we quickly reduce our dependence on Russian gas.
And the price, the relative price, even compared to last year, how much more is it going to cost to source alternatives from these countries that you mentioned? Do you have a sense? Have you modelled anything? Because obviously that then impacts the consumer.
Well, I think the best thing we can do for the consumer is to do collective buy-in, to make sure that we operate on behalf of the whole EU. That would get us the best deal, probably, in negotiating the best price. But, you know, we talk about price, and of course, the burden on the shoulders of our citizens is huge now with the energy prices where they are. But I was just following the news you brought from Ukraine. I mean, this burden is incomparable to the horrors the Ukrainians have to go through, standing up for our values, standing up for democracy. So that we are being put under stress is incomparable to the stress they're being put under. And I think we should take that responsibility. And I think we should also take the responsibility in defending this to our citizens and saying, look, if we really want to diversify energy resourcing, if we really want prices to go down, we have to reduce our dependence on Russian gas, and we have to move much quicker on renewables, because renewables are cheap.
I think the costs are relative, to your point, and we have to accept that. You often talk about the political will to do what's required here. Do you think there's recognition, whether it's across European governments, whether it's across European citizens, that actually Europe is the weak link in efforts to prevent further bloodshed in Ukraine because of the reliance on Russian energy and the funds that are provided for it?
Well, I don't think we're the weak link. I think what Europe has shown is incredible solidarity with Ukrainian people, and also incredible internal cohesion. I've never seen Europe as united as it is today. And I've never seen our transatlantic bond stronger in the last 2 decades as I've seen it today. So there's a lot we can build on. But I do believe we have to take the case to our citizens and say, look, the people in Ukraine are suffering. They're suffering because they're standing up for the things we believe in, for our values, for our common future. And we should be able to muster enough courage to stand up to Putin and to say, okay, even if it's a burden on us, we will do this. But at the end of the day, you know, with sanctions, you have to make sure the guy you apply them on suffers more than you yourself. And that's a very difficult call for all governments to make. But one thing I'm absolutely convinced of, we will go all the way in making sure we support the Ukrainians as much as we can to make sure that they can retain their independence, retain their liberty, and regain a peaceful country.
The Russians have suggested what is paid for now by unfriendly nations, quote, should be paid for in rubles. The German economy minister, I believe, called it blackmail. How would the Commission view such payments?
I think the payments will be done, as always, in international currency, and that will not change.
Do you think we need a campaign at the nation-state level? Use less energy, turn the lights off, wear an extra jumper, simply use less energy and be more efficient, and actually that will also play a huge role in this as well, at least in the short term?
Well, frankly, I believe many of our citizens are well ahead of us. They're already doing this across the European Union. And we need to stimulate that. I agree with you. We need to stimulate that as much as we can. But we also need to recognize that not all citizens can do that. We need to pay more attention to the issue of energy poverty, to support people who are in a precarious position, to make sure they don't, suffer in the cold or suffer because they can't heat their homes. And at the same time, those who can afford to turn down the temperature should do it, or drive a bit less, or work a bit more at home. It has a huge impact on our energy consumption. 1 degree less temperature in our homes is 10 BCM less Russian gas.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think, how people need to start thinking about it, just in terms of our behaviour on an hourly basis. I want to ask you about the comments that were made by President Biden over the weekend when he said that man, Putin, cannot remain in power. Obviously, it's been walked back by the White House. Joe Biden said he wasn't pushing for regime change either. How do you view those comments, and where, again, does the Commission stand?
Well, first of all, I was impressed by the feeling that President Biden put in his speech in Poland. And I was impressed by his show of solidarity with Ukrainian people. And that, that just testifies how strong the transatlantic bond is. But of course, we're not about regime change. Nowhere, not in Russia, not anywhere else. The only ones who will decide about who rules Russia is the Russian people. And I hope they make a wise choice, because they're not being ruled very well. And they're being harmed in such a terrible way by Putin And I hope they draw the right conclusions from this. But that's not for us to decide. That's for the Russians themselves to decide.
You understand the complexities of this situation better than most. You worked as a Russian interpreter. I know you were in Ukraine during the revolution, the Maidan revolution in 2014. What do you see, given the complexities on the Russian side as well, with control in the media? What is the best way to get through to the Russian people and help them understand the realities of the situation? Because in some way I feel like that's also who President Biden was trying to speak to or message to.
Well, frankly, I believe that the ones I put my hope on are the mothers who are now seeing that their sons are dying in Ukraine for something that's so horrible as an invasion of a peaceful country. They're dying in land that is seen as friendly land, as a land that they are very much familiar with, and they feel at home in Ukraine. And their sons, their husbands, their brothers,